Well, that's interesting that you mention that because we've certainly heard of flying cars before. For ages, for years, they've been telling us, oh, in a few years now we will have flying cars. And we haven't, at least not on any major level. It's certainly not a common thing. Now, even if you look at futurism, in other words, predictions of the future, and retrofuturism, past predictions of the future, for some time now, that's for some time has predicted air travel of some sort, things much like flying cars. It's been predicted for some time, and I remember, for example, it was 10 years ago now, before we had this studio, before we had this podcast, I was reading this magazine and it had a concept from Airbus, a company who manufactures airplanes. It was a concept for a flying car, and it was predicted that in, say, the course of several years that would be released to the public, and it would be actually something that was more purchased. And well, that wasn't the case. And still, have you seen a flying car? I certainly haven't.
I haven't seen one. And do you hear that sound? What is that?
I did not hear that sound.
What is it? Oh.
Oh no, that can't be.
You all right there, Isaac? I think I'm good. It's like this. Everything got moved around. What was that? We need to get out of here. The structure might not be safe.
I guess so.
Oh. I have no idea. Okay, we're back out here. Oh my goodness. Look at that.
What?
Do you see that, Isaac? It's a flying car. It just crashed into that structure next to us.
The garage?
Yeah. Let's go take a look. Okay, so good news, everybody. Good news is the recording studio is safe.
Yeah.
Okay? But we heard a loud crash. We thought it was coming towards us. And so we went ahead and escaped as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But a flying car has ran into the studio. I can't believe it. I didn't even know that people were flying those around this area.
Yeah. Well, I guess we know now.
Yes. Yes, we do.
So much for that studio.
Let's go help the driver. Oh no.
Oh no.
Looks like he's passed.
Gone to a better place.
I hope so.
Welcome back to the Very Well Podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined by co-host Jack Fulmer on this April Fool's Day. Jack, what do you have for us today?
Today we'll be looking at the history of April Fool's Day, doing some church research, looking at March Madness, and the dangerous glasses created by AI.
Let's get right into it.
Yeah, let's see if we can get this computer
Skipping or what?
Yeah, it's mind of its own, you know?
Oh.
There we go. Oh, no,
What in the world is that thing doing?
yeah, there we go.
That is ridiculous.
Got it off.
Okay,
All right.
so where are we at now?
And why was it going so fast?
Oh no, that's crazy.
Well, computers do weird things on April Fool's Day. You want to give us some of the history of it?
Yeah, some of the history of it. So April Fool's Day dates back to 1582. What happened in 1582 was really the widespread switch from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, which is the one we use today. The use of it was decreed at the Council of Trent in 1582 by Pope Gregory. That's why we call it the Gregorian calendar. So there were some folks in France who didn't get the memo that the calendar had changed, and they still celebrated the old New Year on what is now April 1st. So they were called fools, or in French actually, April Fish, or Fish of April, Poisson d'Avril, and that's sort of where the tradition originated from, and that's why we celebrate April Fool's Day on April 1st.
And so now this has developed into a worldwide holiday.
It has, largely. It's
mostly
become much larger.
And some people still celebrate it, depending on where you're at.
Yes.
Depending on what situation you're in. We, however, are not really celebrating that, but it did happen to fall on a Tuesday
Right.
for the podcast here.
Mm-hmm.
So, any other history about it?
Any other history about April Fool's Day? Well, there have been a number of historical hoaxes on April Fool's Day. People have gone to a number of lengths to cause April Fool's Day pranks. For example, in 1975, a British news show aired a report, a full-page ad in 6 newspapers claiming that it had purchased the Liberty Bell and was renaming it to the Taco Liberty Bell. That's one of those. And in 1998, Burger King published an ad in USA Today to introduce the left-handed Whopper. The ad said it had the same ingredients, but the condiments were rotated 180 degrees to the left. Burger King said thousands of customers had requested the new sandwich. In 2011, Google announced Gmail Motion, which would allow people to write emails using only hand gestures. In 1965, a London professor interviewed on BBC TV said he perfected smell-o-vision. He claimed his machine broke scents down and transmitted them over television, allowing viewers to smell aromas produced in the television studio in their own homes. So, a number of elaborate April Fool's Day hoaxes there. So a lot of pretty entertaining stuff, and to think it all originated from a scheduling mix-up, a calendar mix-up.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that something like that could still be almost recognized and celebrated in a very funny way in today's culture.
Now it'd be interesting. Now there are small sects of Orthodox Christians who still use the Julian calendar. They call themselves Old Calendarists. So it'd be interesting to hear their take on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, and what do they feel like about it being celebrated?
Right, they're like, what are you guys talking about? This is New Year's Day. So.
Yeah, New Year's Day? No, it's April Fool's Day around the rest of the world.
Right.
There's very few that do believe that.
So that covers April Fool's Day, a little bit about the origins. But what else were we going to look at today, Jake?
Well, I think that we should express the fact that we were fooled last week by that crash that took place, the flying car crash.
Boy, that was a rough day.
It was, but not as rough as what we thought it was. It was actually, did you hear this from the company? That was actually a test to see if somebody could survive if a flying car crashed into a building.
Oh, so it was the flying car crash test drill.
It was, and they put a robot to see how badly the robot would be affected by it.
Really?
So like a dummy inside.
Well,
of there.
you'd think they would have alerted us first.
Yeah. Well, it actually crashed in the wrong location was the issue with that. That's why we didn't
so
get the
it hit
alert.
the garage, but it was supposed to hit our house.
It was supposed to hit like a mile away from here.
A mile away.
But the flying car reached up to 200 miles per hour, and so it went a little bit further from where their crash point was.
So not a great deal of progress on the flying cars that we covered in last week. We'll continue to follow that, but as far as the foreseeable future goes, the manufacturers of flying cars have their work cut out. So.
Yes, they certainly do. And TikTok also has its work cut out, too.
Really? So what's the status on TikTok?
Well, as most people might remember, we even covered this. TikTok went dark under federal legislation that banned the app over national security concerns back in January, before Trump's inauguration.
Yes. And you say that the current status on that, or the current executive order that kept TikTok around effectively in the States? It's getting ready to expire, isn't it?
Yeah, this Saturday on April 5th is going to be the last day that users are able to use TikTok unless another agreement is not able to be reached. So the executive order went for, I believe, about 90 days, or 75 to 90 days, and that will be expiring into the first week of April that we're in here.
Okay.
So this Saturday is when you can expect that to expire.
So coming up soon, and do we know what the president plans to do about that?
Well, it could go dark at this point by April 5th, unless there is a way to sell the app.
Okay. Has there been any indication of that? What do you think is most likely to happen with that?
Well, President Trump has said that he will not allow for TikTok to go dark, but it also does not seem that an agreement will be reached, just based on where we're at right now. So, and that was as of, the end of March.
And that may, if they don't reach an agreement in time, that may actually constitute TikTok going dark, unfortunately, for some people.
It could, and it's also important to realize that somebody could not download the app as of right now. So the executive order only restored TikTok for old users. It does not allow new people to download the app in the United States.
Right, and long-time viewers who have kind of followed this TikTok case as we've reported on it will know that after the ban and everything, and they had the executive order to keep TikTok available to its existing users, so that's not to say that it was available for new users. It wasn't on the App Store, and so phones with TikTok pre-installed were going for big money. So, and presumably they still are, because as far as I know, that's still the case, that you can't install it off of the App Store. It's just existing users that have access to it.
Yeah, so that's one thing that the executive order didn't fix, is allowing new downloads. And so that is why those older phones became so valuable. It's, when something becomes hard to find, which was in that case pretty hard to find, these old phones that already had it pre-installed and downloaded and everything, they were becoming more valuable because there was a shortage.
Absolutely. So we're nearing the deadline to restore access, something of that effect, to keep access available to TikTok. Now, realistically, what do you think will happen? Do you think it will go dark? Do you think someone will swipe it up and purchase it? It wouldn't be unheard of, though, if they intend to sort of pick it up before it ever goes dark, prevent that from ever happening. They are working on something of a deadline. What do you think will happen, Jake?
I don't think it will make it by the deadline.
Okay,
I think it
so
will
you think
go
it'll
dark.
go dark, in other words. Okay.
I think for a while it will, but I don't think it'll go dark for, forever,
Not
for
very
years.
long, because we just can't go on without precious TikTok, right?
Well, according to some people, I know that I would be totally fine. I don't really use it. Not necessarily discouraging people to not, I'm not saying don't use it, but
I can't say that I use it either. Not that I would, as you said, discourage it necessarily, but if you are to use it, I advise that use it responsibly.
Yeah, especially considering that there is this threat of foreign influence.
Many people don't. There's always a security concern. So that's worth being mindful of whenever you are using that, and which, by the way, isn't unique to TikTok. There are other applications that are fairly common in the States that are owned largely by their chief shareholders having major ties with the Chinese government, with the Chinese Communist Party. So it's certainly not isolated to TikTok, and you have the same security concern with a number of other applications. So.
Yeah, so we'll see if TikTok does go dark, but I think it will for a little bit of time, because usually, if I just look at similar cases to this, it seems you almost have to lose something before you realize how valuable it is. And to the people that value TikTok, it's almost like they may have to lose it in order to understand. The people who are really fighting for TikTok will need to lose it to understand.
Right, to understand how valuable it is or isn't.
Yeah.
And so, that covers TikTok. That's, I believe, all of the current up to date, and we'll continue to follow that looking to see what happens. Is that all you have on TikTok for now?
It is. What do you have on Pew Research?
Pew Research. Well, that's actually the Pew Research, so that's not unique to one of their big studies is on religiosity, but that's actually the name Pew. That doesn't refer to church pews necessarily. They do all kinds of surveys and studies. So. But this does happen to relate to religion, and this study came out fairly recently. Some of our viewers, listeners, are likely aware of this. It was their survey on religiosity, and the main takeaway that since 2007 and even further back than that, we've seen a fairly steady decline in religiosity. In other words, being active, church-going. Those are the different metrics that we're looking at here. And the decline has sort of slowed as far as people leaving the churches, which is one of the main things that indicates that decline. It may even gradually be on the increase. Now, one of the factors, of course, if you look at 2020, the pandemic certainly probably influenced that. And what the study found, 86% of people in the United States believe that they have a soul or spirit in addition to their physical body, so that they're not only body, sort of clumps of meat wandering aimlessly through the universe, but actually have a soul. There's a little more to it than that. 83% believe in God or a universal spirit. 79% believe that there is something spiritual beyond the natural world. And 70% believe in an afterlife, meaning heaven, hell, or both. And 92% believe, of course, in one or more of these of the above. So looking at the survey at large, and sort of how the decline has slowed and things have started to plateau a little bit, of course. We're still fairly low as far as those numbers are, but the decline has at least slowed, and you may be able to see the graphics there. That 63% is what we're at now, so it is down considerably, say, looking at the last 10, 20 years, of course. It is a considerable decline, but at the very least, that decline has slowed. So what do we make of that, Jake?
Well, a couple of things to note about the decline. It's only about 15% decline, but you have to think about the fact on a global scale.
Right.
Okay, global scale. 15% of the world.
Right, and this
That's
was
a lot of
survey.
people.
Right. Right.
I mean, if we were to assume that this kind of encompasses a worldwide scale.
Right, it does, of course. Sort of the world following the lead of the United States. Pew Research surveyed the United States, but that has a lot to do with the Western world. So that is a pretty good indicator of what the rest of the Western world is at, I would say, from a religious standpoint.
And I guess if we look more at the plateauing of those results in the last 4 or 5 years,
right.
I think COVID has had, I don't want to say positive, but has changed things, you know.
At the very least, it's played a role in slowing the decline.
It has.
Right. Because during COVID, of course, in the height of it during the lockdowns, you had a great deal of uncertainty because we were largely stuck inside of our houses, not able to go to many of us to school or to work. And for many, sort of the only guaranteed thing, the only constant was church for certain ones. Certain churches didn't even have services. They had certain online services, and that may be a thing of noticing. Perhaps people who weren't attending church to begin with, they might have stumbled across it over the internet while they were in their home locked down. That's certainly a possibility, but the main thing that we're looking at here as far as during the lockdowns is really the only constant thing sort of anchoring them down to reality, so to speak, when nothing else was certain. We're locked down, we're stuck in our house, we're not able to go to school, work, or anything. We're not sure when that will be back to normal. We're not sure we're stuck in quarantine because we're sick. Sort of the only constant was their faith, is at least how I read it. What's your take on it, Jake?
Yeah, I think that definitely could be the case.
Yeah, I think so. Do you have any other thoughts on why that might be?
I think just technology spreading, you know, as we said before, people's curiosity when they had more time during the lockdown. think that's part of it.
Now, I think you touched on something a little bit earlier, and that was kind of interesting. You kind of mentioned how this was, in a way, sort of different from religious practices in the way that we've seen from the past, sort of deviates from it, and the lines are almost blurred with secularism. Well, what were you saying about that?
Well, I do think that modern influence has almost created like I guess you could say, a feel-good environment inside
Right.
of churches, and I think that's very dangerous.
I think so, because there's more to it than that.
Yeah, I think the idea that if everybody just does enough good things, that they'll automatically be in heaven.
Right.
That seems to be kind of the modern interpretation is
Right,
that
the
just doing
prosperity
good
gospel,
deeds.
as they call it.
Yes, that
Right,
seems to
right.
be kind of a newer idea. So
Right, just,
that
go
would be
to,
a downside of
go to
that.
Los Angeles, see, Pastor Joel Osteen in his mega church, just gotta, donate enough to support his private jet, so.
Yeah, that seems to be really the new thing that we're seeing, and again,
Right,
it's
I mean, it
very
is madly
dangerous.
popular if you look at, I mean, what a huge church that is. And it seems that there's a little more to it than that, right? Because you see a lot of that, as we kind of talked about before, where it blurs with secularism, or where you have these people that they profess to be Christian, perhaps to believe, but they're really cultural Christian, only culturally. As far as that goes, it's sort of in name only. But like, oh yeah, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Easter, and we go to church on those days.
Maybe once a month,
Right.
or yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be, yeah, as we said, the kind of the trend, and so that's the only bad thing about this decline in, just what we're seeing. That decline, as you mentioned, that would be a downside to it, is that it might not be for the right reasons.
Right.
So, but something else we've been, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, as that's a major conversation piece and just controversy in general about what its uses should be. And
Yeah, I've heard
bad
about some new
things.
developments on artificial intelligence.
We do, and artificial intelligence has taken its own opinion about which religion would be most likely to be true, just based on historical data and just information that AI has about different religions. And what we see is, depending on what AI source you use, is that some artificial intelligence companies, the response is that Christianity seems to be the most believed religion. What do you think about the fact that artificial intelligence is now telling us that?
I mean, I think that's a real testament to it. I mean, I think for certain people it was already fairly obvious, but I think for many people sort of genuinely inquiring on AI that might not otherwise know, I think that is pretty beneficial insight. And, well, you don't really have to know that for certain if you look back. And of course, we talked about, of course, the Western world, otherwise known as Christendom, the predominant religion, and as part of the world being Christianity, and there's a reason for that, of course, from a historical standpoint, as opposed to other religions. We've got more to work with. There's a very strong argument to be made for that.
Yes, and we have to, we have to watch that very closely for
Yeah.
anybody who's going entirely off of what AI says. But
Right.
AI can have, there can be some legitimacy to what it
Positive,
says.
worthwhile insights like that.
And so I just thought that was very interesting, that it also depends on what AI you use. And so that really shows us that all artificial intelligence is different. It's made differently, it's created differently, and sometimes it can even just be based on just even a couple words can affect what AI says.
Right. And that's an interesting thing, and that ties back to what we were talking about earlier, about the lines kind of being blurred between Christianity and secularism, where people are sort of, say, Christian in name only. They profess to be one, but they as far as their practice goes, really don't do a whole lot. And I think that's largely as a product of sort of looking at Scripture is something, say, oh yes, there are a lot of valuable parables and lessons in Scripture, and it's a really good piece of literature, but it's not merely that, it's also a historical account, and a more complete historical account, really, than what we have for any other religion.
And so I think if artificial intelligence is looking, even from an unbiased standpoint, you can still reach that by the historical information that it provides.
From an objective standpoint.
Yeah, an objective standpoint.
We've just got more to work with. We just know so much more about Jesus Christ of Nazareth.
And so we talk about artificial intelligence sometimes as dangerous. This could be a good use for it, but there are some other dangerous inventions, like the new glasses that were used in the New Year's terrorist attack in New Orleans, there in the French Quarters.
So we reported on that terrorist attack in New Year's in New Orleans. I haven't heard about these glasses. They're AI glasses. Are they sort of like those Meta glasses where they partnered with Ray-Ban, where they actually look like glasses? They're sort of disguised in a way. Is that what we're talking about?
It's not clear if those are the exact glasses
not those
that were
exact
used.
ones, but presumably
Similar.
They were somewhat disguised and looked like ordinary glasses, right?
Yeah, and so we now know that the driver who was inside of that truck, who ran, through the streets there in the French Quarters, the early morning of January 1st, we now know that the driver actually walked through and scoped out the French Quarters on New Year's Eve by wearing these glasses and taking video. So you walk around and you see somebody wearing glasses, you don't actually think that they're recording. I think that makes these particularly dangerous. What do you think?
Oh, as far as being able to record without anyone else necessarily knowing?
Yeah, is that something that we should consider dangerous?
Well, I suppose it is in a way, and with certain precautions. I don't really have an issue with it per se, and I would caution against really cracking down on it, because I've certainly heard certain countries with sort of more authoritarian governments, like even on smartphones, every smartphone company, they're required, mandated to have a shutter sound on smartphones, just because they're that sort of paranoid, sort of from a surveillance standpoint. They're like, oh, you've got to know, and I think something like that, as far as going into authoritarian things like that, that could potentially be a slippery slope. So I'm not suggesting we do something like that, but I think maybe just a fair warning. And of course, naturally, if these products become more common, which it's not clear that they don't seem to have really caught on. You see them now and again, but I've seen a lot of people with these glasses. I think people have become more accustomed to that, just sort of like how they became accustomed to security cameras becoming more common, because it was not so long ago that you didn't really see security cameras in public.
But I think these are a little bit more discreet.
Right, and they're even more disguised in certain security cameras. That is the case. What are your thoughts? Do you think?
I think it makes it more dangerous.
Okay, so what do you suggest? That some sort of law to be passed on that?
Well, one place where this would be very dangerous is places where cameras are not permitted, like video surveillance. It's not permitted at all.
Right.
Particularly like, a courtroom. This could be, certain courtrooms, depending on the case that's going on. If somebody were to record without anybody knowing, and get top secret information, and that brings up another point, a closed door meeting. If somebody went into the White House and went in on a closed discussion and recorded the whole thing.
That would certainly be a legitimate concern, and definitely a worthwhile one. And really, these are uncharted territories, because we haven't seen something like this, a camera that can so easily be disguised. I mean, we've seen things similar to this, of course, just different offices being bugged as far as hidden microphones and different things like that. That's not entirely new. So we've seen things similar to this, but
we have, but not in the sense of video surveillance being so unnoticed. And that's exactly what happened. Is nobody really even noticed, because it was just a person walking down the street wearing a pair of glasses. You would never suspect that as dangerous or as somebody gathering intel.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on what ought to be done about this?
I'm not even sure that they should be sold.
Okay, not sure that. So you think this sort of thing ought to be outlawed?
Yeah, and because
Okay.
it's going to be very hard to look at every single person wearing glasses and say, we need to make sure that they're not recording.
All right, well, I'll disagree with you on that. I don't think they ought to be outlawed. I think perhaps a more practical option is, say, major cities, main issues where we see crimes like this, like New Orleans, a prime example of it. That's what we were just talking about. They already have a great deal of surveillance in city areas, like where these areas are, and the police already have access to different tools, just sort of thermal cameras and different, close surveillance, where they can be able to zoom in. So I think tools like this, maybe a specific sort of thermal camera or specific sort of detector for these that the police have access to, I think that would be beneficial. But as long as people are using these within the bounds of law, which I'm sure a majority of people who have these are, I don't think that ought to be a problem. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that I see with that is that we've already had, a terrorist attack here in the
Sure.
U.S. because of these
Right.
glasses.
Mm-hmm.
But I do understand what you're saying about the majority of people are not
Right.
going to be using them for that purpose.
Right.
But the fact that an attack like this did
Sure.
happen to start off 2025 certainly
Right.
means at the very least it should be looked into.
Right, and you mentioned that like you would think, New Orleans Police Department is a considerable bit of crime there, and it's a major city, so they have quite a lot of resources probably to work with as far as surveillance in the city areas and thermal cameras, things like that. So you're like, oh, well, you're suggesting that, but presumably they already have a lot of that. Well, they probably had some of that, but this is largely sort of one of those first major incidents we've seen with those. So it may take a little time to develop those more specialized detectors for those glasses, but I think that something like that would be quite a viable option and quite likely the best option as far as addressing that goes, because I don't want that to be problematic for, again, likely the majority of people who are using those well within the bounds of law.
So something that should definitely be further researched
Sure.
and investigated and just really considered, but
Sure, and we'll
something
continue
that
to
could be
follow
very
that.
useful.
We'll continue to follow that. So we know that those were used in the incident recently that took place in New Orleans and New Year's. We don't really know of any other incidents, any major crimes that have involved those. If you know of any that you'd like us to cover, you can let us know. You can either put that in a comment below the video, send that in to gwp-international@att.net. That's gwp-international@att.net. So you can send any of that in. But that's all we know on that matter as of current, I believe, unless there's anything you might add to it, Jake.
Not that I can think of at this time, but we'll follow it as you said.
Okay, so what else are we looking at today?
Well, as yesterday was the last day of March, March Madness has not actually yet concluded, but we are getting very close, and just wanted to go ahead and remind everybody to tune in Saturday night for the Final Four games to see who will make it to the National Championship game, which will be next Monday, April 7th. So when TikTok goes down this Saturday, you can, mourn in the sense of watching Final Four games for March Madness.
Right. So, at least that's something that you might be able to keep busy with. Yeah. Anyway, do you see someone outside?
I don't, but who is it? Who is it?
I don't know, a little white car. You want to go check on that?
Yeah.
Alright. Pardon the interruption, folks. Jeff will be back shortly. So you want me to come check it out too?
Oh, well, I don't see it.
You don't see it? Well, I could have sworn I saw it. Here, I'll show you. Yeah, you see that out there? They must be here for you, pal. Yeah, I'm sure sorry.
What?
Well, it was,
where
nice
at?
knowing you. Good luck in the clinic.
What police car?
April Fool.
Oh my goodness. You brought me all the way out here just for nothing?
Oh, well, I mean to see the car.
Yeah, my car.
You never know. It could have been a police car.
I don't see any police car out here. Well, I guess that's good. That would be quite an April Fool's joke.
Yeah.
But, at least there's no flying car over here.
Right.
There is that good news. All right.
Not yet.
Well, I guess that's going to be it for today on the podcast. You want to sign us off?
Sure. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time.
I am Jacob Fulmer.
And I'm Isaac Hedges, host of the Great World Podcast, signing off. Until next time. From all of us at the Great World Podcast and GWP International, good night and God bless.